Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gary Case. I'm Principal Consultant with Pink Elephant. And today I want to spend about 30 minutes with you talking about how organizations have a tendency to go from no processes to really over-engineering their processes. And this is a great example of why we need to use lean. And I'm going to talk about how we would look at this from our perspective on an ongoing basis, that we can use lean actually as a way to get started in helping with some process design. But quite often what happens is that we're brought in after the fact, after they've already done a lot of their process activities and design work. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what are some of the drivers for process development? In other words, why are organizations focused on we have to design our processes, develop those, implement those processes out there, and then also based upon what typically happens in organizations, that I'm going to talk also about what are some of the lean option areas that we're going to look at. And I'll just talk about some basic tools here. This is not anything far-reaching, but I'm going to talk about how we've been successful in actually using these tools, and also I'll give you some stories around organizations of what I've seen, how we've implemented some things and some of the challenges that organizations have had. So if we start looking at the drivers for process development, it can come anywhere from organizations that have conducted some sort of a process maturity and capability assessment, and they find out that their process maturity and capability is low, and they therefore want to go on ahead and improve that. And it shouldn't be always just about improving your capability and maturity. It should be really also focusing on the value-added activities, and a part of that may mean that you have to identify upfront those non-value-added activities, and then how can you eliminate that form of waste that is there. And also from a capability perspective, oftentimes it's identifying areas where we're ending up doing redundant work, rework, because we like to introduce defects into the production environment. And whether that word we like to do it, it happens all the time, so I don't know another word. It seems like we can accept having those defects. Oftentimes internal or external audit findings is a big driver for process development. Also, customer dissatisfaction. They aren't getting a consistent level of service, from the IT organization. They're dissatisfied with the organization's ability to respond to their business requirements. They're not flexible in meeting the needs of the business. So that customer dissatisfaction is one of the key areas also that companies need to step back and take a look at their overall process of either they have nothing or they have over-engineered it. Lack of consistency also about in processes. Within IT, you have to balance both efficiency and effectiveness to ensure that we can deliver our IT services in an ongoing manner that is going to be both repeatable as well as predictable. And so that means that the processes have to be at the right level. And every organization that wants to use some sort of best practice framework, model, or standard that is out there, every model, framework, and standard always says make it fit for purpose, just don't do it by the book. And organizations have a tendency, they always err on the side of being more effective and less efficient, and that creates a risk to the organization itself. So there are certain processes within IT, and change management would be one of those immediately that comes to mind, is that we have to have the ability to handle a large volume of changes that's coming into the organization for efficiency, but we also have to protect the production environment. Therefore, we need that level of effectiveness out there also. And as I mentioned, if we cannot respond to the changing business requirements, their needs that they have to have, then that gets to be an issue. And that's why you're finding more and more organizations going to some sort of an agile development methodology, and we've actually even taken that approach and used it in our process design along with lean that is there. And just because we do things, that doesn't mean that we're always doing it with a level of quality. Sometimes we miss the boat when we start talking in terms of quality, and this goes back again to what type of quality are we putting into the production environment that we're able to manage on an ongoing basis. And quite often also some of the areas that we run into is that organizations will say we need to develop our processes simply because our people don't know what they're supposed to do. They may have functional roles but the functional roles don't go deep enough to talk about what are the responsibilities from each of the process perspectives. So oftentimes organizations will say we need to develop a process for one of the very specific areas around defining roles and responsibilities, plus also having your RACI matrix to clearly identify who's going to be responsible for executing the activities, who's accountable, the buck stops with that person, who's consulted, and who's informed. So when we start thinking about what happens, organizations have a tendency, they have no processes, especially if they've started off as small organizations, you know, mom and pop type shops, or just organizations that they just go so fast and so furious that they haven't had time to step back and really gone ahead and say that we need to have our processes or we have to have them documented. I was in one organization when I asked to see their process documentation. They handed me a one-page document. That was the entire process that was there. But what then happens is that organizations, due to that previous slide I just showed where they had all of the different factors about why an organization would want to choose to get more formal about documenting their processes, I've actually seen them go from nothing within a very short period of time to that they not only have dozens and dozens of pages of process documentation, I've seen it into the 200, 300 page documentation that is out there. That has never been the intent when we like to talk with organizations about their process and getting that formalized and documented that is there. It really should be at a high enough level that people clearly know what they need to do, when they need to do it, how they need to do it, and a basic understanding of, you know, what is the purpose of this process, the objectives of the process, and what's the outcomes that we want to really achieve there. And so when we start looking at that equation around that value added, you know, when we have no documentation, I can say that we have high risk, so we're probably not adding a lot of value. And when you have hundreds of pages of documentation, I can also guarantee you that I don't feel like you're going to be getting any value out of those hundreds of pages of documentation. I've even seen 80 to 90 to 100 page documents that never get used in an organization. Right or wrong, if it's not being used, then truly what is the value of that? And the other thing that I see when we start talking about moving from nothing to having this large document is oftentimes organizations, I've seen it that small organizations will spend tens of thousands of dollars, mid-size hundreds of thousands, and very large global organizations, I've seen them spend into millions of dollars to document and implement their processes. And yet they don't have two nickels that's been budgeted to go on ahead and say, how do we protect that initial you know, investment that we made in the definition of the process and implementation of the process. So they aren't always looking at their process to say, how can we get better? And that's one of the things that we really need to look at, is continually looking at improving the efficiency and effectiveness of our processes, all based upon what is the value that the customer is going to get out of that. So 4 areas that I want to focus on today is around what's on the screen here. First off is the voice of the customer. People in IT oftentimes don't get to that level of really understanding the voice of the customer and talking with the customer. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that as we go through here. Also the critical to quality, which is, you could argue, a subset of the voice of the customer, to really understand the requirements that the customers have out there. And then how can we use SIPOC as a helpful way to not only develop maybe something new, but also to use it as a way to you know, lean any existing processes that are out there. And then also a value stream map, again, understanding the value-added activities versus the non-value-added activities. So when we start thinking in terms of the customer value, it's really at the center. And, you know, some of the things that we have to think about is that focus on quality and prevention of defects. That's, you know, first time final type things that we always want to take a look at and truly understand what is going on. Also, we have to make sure all the activities that we are performing are really those value-added activities. And that's a tough balance for some organizations, because they have a tendency to want to be more effective, and they also don't have a good decision-making model in place, so therefore there may be a lot of wait time waiting on decisions. And then also, when we go through from an IT perspective, is understanding what we have from a variability perspective, so we can have a better flow just through our overall just-in-time approach and really try to reduce the peaks and valleys that we have to deal with on an ongoing basis. And those peaks and valleys can be something just as well as at the service desk on Monday mornings after a weekend of a lot of changes and people forgetting passwords, to the demands upon our technology and our services that we have based upon what customers use our service, how they use it, when they use it, and then therefore what's the impact upon our technology. And also this overall just-in-time approach and the value-added activities and the prevention of defects is really around people aspect also, is that we have to have the right people with the right skill sets, the right mindset, all available at the right time, but also working on the right work. And that's another factor that in IT that I oftentimes find is that we have people not doing the right work that is out there. And so that's something that we always have to think about. So the voice of the customer. Really, everyone on the call, I'm sure, understands customer defines what value is, and it's going to be expressed in the product or the service. That's how they see the value. And they look at it from an end-to-end customer experience, whereas my findings usually is that within IT has a tendency to look at things from a very siloed perspective that is out there. So it's the server team working in their area, the development working in their area, the database groups working in theirs, the desktop people working in theirs. It's very much of a struggle for IT organizations to see that processes go end to end across all functional groups, regardless of where people reside, technology resides, or processes even resides. So we have to look at that overall end-to-end customer experience, because that's really what they're concerned about. And also in IT, we oftentimes have a real tough time defining who is our customer that is out there. I've worked in organizations, and I do this up front. I ask people who I'm talking to, anywhere from the senior managers down to mid-level managers, frontline managers, and individual contributors, of who is their customer, and it's amazing to see the results that people will tell you about who is their customer. One prime example I have is that one organization I was working with up in the northwest part of the United States, when they wanted to do a service catalog, I asked them, well, who's the customer that you're trying to serve here? And they said, oh, it's them. And I said, are you sure it's them? They go, yeah, it's them. And I double, triple asked them, how many times? I don't know, but are you sure that they're the customer? And absolutely, they were sure. So they wanted to do a quick win. They did a service catalog. The service catalog was produced. They got it checked off as a quick win. And then they actually spent the next 8 months doing the service catalog, because no matter how often I asked and I tried to sway them into a different view of who their customer was, they looked at it from an internal perspective, that they were an infrastructure group and that their customer was the development group. And you can have that relationship, but what they were really trying to do was get that true end customer that uses this company's products and services on an ongoing basis. And also, from a lean IT perspective, the person who is next in line in the value stream is also viewed as a customer, and sometimes we don't talk to those people also that we're going to be handing off work to, or handing off the next thing that needs to be done, or a decision that needs to be made. Those are all things that we take a look at. So the key questions down there at the bottom, as simple as it seems, it's absolutely amazing when you start asking the question of who is my customer, to really kind of see what the results are going to be. And you can have multiple customers within an IT organization. I think sometimes we get confused because we're both a service provider as well as a consumer of service at times. But the customer we really have to think in terms of is who is using our product and service first and foremost, but then also it's the next person in the value stream that we hand things off to also. And we have to understand that whole aspect of what does a customer want. I like to use the word need. What are their requirements versus a wish list, And because I think sometimes customers will want something, not understanding that there's cost associated with that particular want. And so that's why I like to go on ahead and move to the next area and talk about critical to quality. And again, from a critical to quality perspective, it's working and talking with the customers that are out there and understanding what are their real requirements that they have, and also allow them to identify their issues. And then we have a mechanism that we go through where we start prioritizing what they really want to take a look at, and what's the most important to them, because we can't go on ahead and meet all of their business requirements or even their wishes that they have out there. And we have to have that conversation really up front. And oftentimes that I will let people practice this before they go out and really do it real live with their customers. So it's in kind of a control group, or someone playing the customer role, someone may be playing a business relationship manager role, and I got other observers, or a bunch of people are playing the business relationship manager. And it's interesting to see what IT people do is that oftentimes instead of asking the customer the questions, they actually start providing a solution to the customer without even knowing really what problem that they're trying to solve. And so they don't look at this, again, from an end-to-end perspective. So as we go through the critical to quality, it's really about being able to get the customer through our questioning to really describe what are their real functional requirements that the customer needs to have in place, and then also what are those wishes that they have, and then they prioritize those in order from a customer's perspective of what's the most important in the critical to quality tree. And again, the customer has to play a big part in this, and then also understand that services just are not free. It doesn't matter what charging method you use, whether you actually charge for your services or there's a corporate umbrella that covers all your services. If customers don't have an idea that there's a cost to delivering the services, i.e. through our processes that enable the services, and they may be asking for things that can get a little bit out of hand. And then with that, we also internally have to go on ahead and start talking at this particular stage of the critical to quality from an IT delivery perspective, what is going to be our measurable attributes that we're really going to look at. And for many organizations, this is a challenge also because they typically don't think in terms of, what do we need to monitor, measure, and report against, whether it's at a process level, whether it's at a technology component level, or whether it's at an end-to-end service level. So having this discussion right up front, that internally of what we're going to monitor, measure, and report against is very important. So when we talk to the customer that is using our end product or service, it's the requirements and our wishes. Prioritize those. Then we have to talk to the people, the next in the value chain that is out there. So in other words, you could actually say that operations is going to be one part of the value stream at the end. We also need to talk with them to understand what are their requirements that they would have in place to make sure that they can manage, support, and sustain this new service, or what do they need to have in place, if there's going to be processes that is going to be handing off, artifacts, from life cycle stage to life cycle stage to life cycle stage. So as an example, service design as a part of the ITIL life cycle stage is all about requirements, and the output of that is really a service design package that has a list of requirements and plans, etc. It gets handed off to service transition, who will then go on ahead and build, test, and deploy that service or process or processes. Either way, it could be both ways, into the production environment. And then there's an expectation that operation would have that there's going to be certain packages and artifacts and documents handed off to operations to understand clearly how to go about and monitor, measure, manage, support, sustain that service when it does go live. So with that, then we use a SIPOC. And this is just an example, so I'm not going to go through the example. I'm going to talk about the concepts of how we use a SIPOC. So if an organization is just starting to talk about we need to develop a process, we will bring this up and we'll say, before you get started in writing all the process documents, I think it's important for you to clearly understand the relationships that you're going to be having. And we talk in terms of, you know, sitting down with the customers, having a workshop, and having them go through and truly identify who are the suppliers, who's going to be providing input into this particular process, and having them go through that whole discussion on suppliers, then also what are the exact inputs that we need to go on ahead and execute this process. As an example, I would say for change management, you're going to have your request for change, you're going to have your priority model, you're going to have your risk model, you're going to have your release schedule, you're going to have your maintenance windows. Those are all forms of input that allows us to go on ahead then and truly do the process, be able to execute all the process steps. And then on the process, that's where we bring in best practices. So we will provide them best practices either from an ITIL perspective or a COVID-5 perspective of what are the activities that are commonly called out. And all we're doing right now is getting those activities kind of put in place so that we can go on ahead and understand what we're going to be doing so that we can set everything up for when we do the value stream mapping and we start talking about what's the purpose of all the activities, what's the output that we're expecting, and really start just having some overall general discussions around, you know, what that activity needs to be doing at a very high level. Again, all based on the input that is there. And then we continue with the workshop going through, and sometimes then it's the output. So out of this particular process, again, at a high level, what would you expect to have as your output? And again, it gets the teams to start thinking about this output, because that means the output of this particular process will then become input into one or more other processes, you know, that you would be implementing. And so this is where we also start talking about the whole garbage in, garbage out, is that if you have a poorly defined process, you're not going to get the quality data and information you need out of that process, and so therefore you put at risk other processes that will use the output of this process as input into theirs. And then IT being IT, they like to automate things, and so now we've automated a potentially bad process, and that just means we get things out faster, more consistently, but high quality garbage, you could say, that through there. And then also, who is going to be the customer of this particular process that is there? Because remember that we have to go back to that critical to quality, and you know, who is the customer question, that we have to be able to also define the requirements of the customer that is going to use the end product or service, but also whoever may be next in the value stream that is there. And so by doing this and setting down at the very beginning and having this discussion really clears the air, and again, it gets people to understand also that as they start talking about the suppliers, the inputs, etc., they may realize they don't have all the right people in the room, because they need to have that representation from end to end to truly get that information in there. And then the same thing is that we can use this as we go through, and they've already got a process that's been documented. They know they have some challenges, and so we go through the exact same concept here. Now sometimes we actually start with the C, because some people can get a better handle on who's the customer of the processes first, but you know, we'll just follow along with the SIPOC and start with the S again, going through who are the suppliers, what's the input, what the process is. And this is real interesting when you start getting doing a SIPOC on an existing process, because I will ask people, even though you don't use it, I will ask them to tell me what do you actually do, and we record all the activities, and then I'll ask about their document. And oftentimes you'll find that what they're actually doing is not in alignment with what has been documented. So that in its own right could be a gap, and it could be better because they've leaned it without thinking about it, or it could be that they've created more risk for the organization. So this is where you start getting them again, just to start thinking about, you know, those activities that they are actually doing today, and how does it relate to maybe anything I've documented that is out there, and are there gaps that are around there? And in some cases I've been in organizations, and this one sticks in my mind. In 2012, I was doing an assessment, and I asked them about their process documentation, and they say, oh, we have a document, and they brought it to me and had a date of 2009 on it. So that told me they really hadn't been paying any attention. And then also talking about what would you expect the outputs of your process to be, and what are the actual real outputs that is there, and then who's the customer, and who had you anticipated being the customer. So whether you're doing a SIPOC at the beginning or at the end, there's some real value in either of those areas that's out there. And what it really does is open up some eyes and gets people to start thinking about maybe we don't have the right people in here. And then we also use the value stream mapping, and I'm just going to cover this at a very high level. You don't want to use the documentation to create your value stream map. You want to go see, you want to observe, and we like to use the analogy that if you're in a relay, so it's a race, whether it's a mile or whatever it is that you have, 4 people in that relay, do you watch the players or do you watch the baton? And, we've even had that question. We ask people, and they'll say, well, you watch the players, and that's the wrong thing. You got to watch the baton as it goes around the course. And the same thing is that if you're dealing with an incident or a problem or a change or a release or whatever, you have to watch that incident ticket, that request ticket, that change ticket as it moves through. And so it's really about trying to get an agreement on what is the actual duration time, and the only way to do that is to observe it. You just can't take people's memory. And also, you don't want to just use the metrics out of your tool, because that in its own right can be a very high risk, because not everybody is following the process or using the tool appropriately. So it is go see, observe, watch, time things on an ongoing basis. So you start tracking what should be your standard time, if that was documented as part of your original documentation, what's your actual time, and then the real key is to understand what happens in between the different process activities, how much wait time there is for decisions or other purposes, how much rework is done. We have to send something back because it's not completed. You have all of these aspects that's there, and you start identifying very quickly. You can see a lot of the non-value added activities, and even when you sit down and you start thinking in terms of what you're actually delivering back out to that customer in the terms of how long did it take to do something versus how long should it have taken, value-added activities versus the non-value. So real quickly, just looking at this slide here, in white up there under step 1, it has 10. That would be, let's say, 10 minutes. That's standard time. So everything in white, the 10, 15, 45, etc., is standard time. That's what would be anticipated that you would be able to do this in. And again, we use the value stream mapping as a part of also the overall, how do I want to say this, creation of the process itself. So in other words, we have underneath step 1, you see the 12 and then the 120. The 12 is the actual time, so the standard says we thought it would be done in 10. It's taking us now 12 minutes. The 120 is the lead time of minutes in between. You can see the 15 in step 2 of standard, 15 duration, so we were right on, but 480 minutes of wait time in between there. And oh, by the way, now we had to send some stuff back. So this is what we're really looking at, and again, you can use this to help you design your process up front. Based upon, you can start thinking in terms of what should be actual time, your standard time in between, and then definitely you can use this as an after effect, that when the process is already documented and you know that the customers aren't happy with it, it's really about identifying all those non-value added times that are in there. So I think right now that I am done. And Jacqueline, do you want me to turn this back over to you at this point in time?
Yep, that's just fine.
Give keyboard and
all right. Well,
see. Oh. Change presenter.
Nope, you don't need to do anything.
Go ahead.
Good now.
Okay.
All right. Well,
perfect. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for facilitating our session today. As mentioned previously, today's webinar is being recorded. Look for an email following our time together for a link to the recording. Feel free to share this throughout your organization. So again, thank you, Gary, and thanks to each of you for participating in today's session. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.